we seem to have a bit of a disagreement. Not a disagreement, but we were talking about, the next topic to record, and I pulled up some work that I'd done in the past with our clients on this concept of shiny object syndrome. And Carrie said, what'd you say again, Carrie?
I said, is that something you really want to talk about?
Implying that
you like a shiny object.
Interesting. You think so?
Okay, I was teasing, and I'll take it back to some degree.
But it's okay.
No, I'll offend you if I need to.
Let's air out our grievances in front of our listeners. That's
absolutely healthy, right? I mean, if I'm going to analyze you specifically, I don't think that you have shiny object syndrome in the macro. And I'm talking in the context of business, right? I think you're very clear on where you're going and where you're headed and what that looks like. I do think, though, in the micro, you're someone who likes to try new things.
Yeah, it's fair. So let's dig into this, and I do think this is a worthwhile path to go down for our listeners. I talk to people all the time who get very distracted by shiny objects.
Yeah.
And I think you already offered some kind of interesting framing on when that might be appropriate, when it might not be appropriate. But let's talk about, first of all, when it's not appropriate, why is it a problem? And even before that, I think it's worth noting there are tons of forces out there that try to pull you into shiny object syndrome. And in fact, this is one of my, frankly, grievances with the marketing industry is marketers prey on shiny object syndrome, right? They prey on this idea that what you're doing isn't working and you're struggling and it shouldn't be that hard. It should be easier. And it's hard because you're doing the wrong things. And if you do this thing and buy my course and buy my widget and buy my platform or buy my AI tool now, then all of a sudden, the air will smell fresher, food will taste better, you'll be better looking, and you'll have more money in your pocket just by focusing on my new shiny object. And it's an alluring proposition, isn't it? Why? Where's the allure in that, Carrie?
It's interesting. So it's alluring, and I'm going to say something. I don't know if this is where you were going or not, but I also believe that a lot of shiny object syndrome comes from a lack of confidence. Because if I'm feeling a little bit unsure, and if I know that to be able to make this thing that I'm working on successful is going to require me to sit in this level of discomfort and to do a bunch of work, and it's going to be hard and I'm probably going to fail, of course, starting something new looks really attractive. Because that moment of starting something new, that first bit, right? That first week, that first couple days, that first month, whatever the timeline is, where you got the whiteboard out, or you're building the plan and you're dreaming and you're thinking your way through everything. That's the fun part, right? That's the exciting part. That's the part where you haven't failed yet. That's the part where you can feel really confident about what's going to happen. And then suddenly you hit some level of reality or, some kind of turbulence or friction or bump in the road. And now absolutely the next exciting thing looks, really interesting. And so, and maybe this is coming off, we just recorded an episode on imposter syndrome, and my brain's probably still in that place of thinking about people who are living in that lack of confidence. I think it's really important to recognize that sometimes that's what's happening, right? You're jumping around because you don't want to go through the necessary discomfort and hard work.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you're doing something for the first time, whatever it may be, and obviously our experience here is largely in marketing, and we support clients in their marketing and business development activity and effort. And generally speaking, we're dealing with consultants who are fairly novice at that and don't have a ton of marketing experience or business development experience or skill sets or frankly interest at first in engaging in any of that, but understand that it's necessary. And so therefore they're doing it for the first time. And when you're doing it for the first time, by definition, you don't know what works. because you haven't succeeded. Therefore, imposter syndrome comes up, like we talked about in the last episode. But also, because you don't know what works, you don't have a proven track record, you can't say, okay, here's the path with certainty. You can start on something because somebody convinced you that was the right thing to do. And inevitably, any tactic, any strategy is going to have some friction. There's going to be resistance. There's going to be in the beginning, to your point, when you're conceptualizing things, it's all fun and interesting and creative. And then when the rubber hits the road and like the messy middle, where you have to start to sustain your activity in order to get results, but the results might not be as fast as you want them to be, there's a tendency to give up and to chase the next thing where your dopamine can fire again, right? Your dopamine centers can light up in response to the new exciting opportunity that should be easier than the slog you're going through right now. Not that the thing you're doing can't work, but because starting something new is more enjoyable than pushing through the middle of the thing you're already doing. And again, marketers don't make that easy on you. We I say we as I'm a marketer, but I like to think I don't prey on that idea like other marketers. It can be very challenging because somewhere in your feed is the next marketer saying, "Wow, X is dead." and if you're not doing this, then you're going to become extinct and you're an idiot and you're a fool. And it can be really easy to buy into those kinds of narratives. Again, to your point, especially when you lack domain knowledge, you just don't know enough about the topic to be able to discern what makes sense, what doesn't. And so the net of this, which is unfortunate and something we see far too often, is consultants who struggle to get clients and build pipeline who have tried 10 different things. But they haven't really done all 10 to their fullest extent. They haven't really seen all 10 through completely. They've just dabbled here and there in a bunch of different areas with nothing to show for it.
And like most things that we talk about on this podcast, and like honestly most things in life, this all comes back to some level of balance, right? Of striking the right tone. Because it is possible as well, and I think this is less common, especially in today's society, to your point, with so many inputs coming at us, that you have people who just like grab on to the thing they're going to work on and they'll stick to it too long, right? Like they will never change. They'll never move on to the next thing or switch tacks at all. And then at the other end of the continuum, you have people who are like always jumping from one thing to the next. The reality is you want to end up in a place where you are paying enough attention so that if something that is truly valuable, that is new, exists, that you at least take the time to consider it. Absolutely. But more importantly, and again, if we talk about sort of where people are trending, especially currently, you want to give whatever it is you're doing enough time, enough attention, enough focus, enough effort to decide if it actually is working or not before you move on to the next thing. And so, what we're not saying is pick a lane and stick in it forever. What we are saying is be really, really careful of jumping on to the next new and exciting thing. And to your point about AI, I mean, that's a huge distraction in so many ways. Also, it brings a lot of value, right? There are things that it does that are really helpful and useful. But
are you trying to get in favor with the robots right now, Carrie? Is that
always?
We love you, robots.
Yep.
So just remember this, okay?
You got to remember us. Remember us.
Rule the world. Okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
But also the robots love us, right? And the robots are more than happy to tell you to move on to the next thing and, get excited about something else. And yes,
this changes everything.
That idea. Exactly.
Robots like to say, right?
Exactly. That idea that you had in the moment has now turned into a full-blown plan ready to execute because you spent 15 minutes with
that's so interesting. Yeah.
Right. And so, it's really important to figure out where your feet are solidly under you, right? What is the thing that you truly believe in? And where is there some room to dabble?
So AI kind of enables these rabbit holes, doesn't it? You've got this idea of a shiny object, you saw an 100%. Ad or a post, and you fire up Claude or ChatGPT. Well, do you think this would work for me? Oh yeah, this could be.
If
really
you think so, I think it's great.
There's 5 different ways to do it. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Now all of a sudden your brain is firing in potentially completely the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Now, what's really interesting. This came to mind while you were speaking. I think we come across a couple of different types of people, both of whom, arguably outwardly, you could say have suffered from shiny object syndrome in some ways, but one ends up in a better place than the other. And the difference lies in what you just referred to in terms of, did they see things through sufficiently to learn from them? So anytime I talk to somebody who's done a bunch of things, well, we tried this tactic and we tried this kind of outreach and we did cold email, we did podcast, agency, and blah, 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 right? My first question is always, so why do you think those things didn't work? And that tells me everything. Because one type of person who dabbled in each of those areas, but didn't do enough to actually learn what works, what doesn't work, and why it might not be the right tactic for them, they go, I don't know. You tell me.
Mm-hmm.
That person's getting disqualified real fast. Right? And another type of person goes, yeah, interesting question. Here's what we learned. Here's what we observed. Here's what we now believe as a result of those activities. And that person also tends to have the belief that none of those efforts are wasted, that those efforts produced learning that they can use to inform their next approach. So they tend to not look at those efforts as, oh, I can't believe we wasted all this time and money. They go, yeah, well, we were experimenting and we saw things through and the results were what we wanted them to be. And this is our opinion on why that is. And therefore we're refining our approach. And that's why we're here, to find a better way, given all that learning. Now, you might not call that shiny object syndrome, right? Maybe there's a different word for that. But I think to your point, the question folks ought to be asking is, have I gone deep enough in this particular activity or tactic or strategy to be able to really conclude on whether the results are going to show up or not? Or have I just dabbled and am I abandoning ship potentially just before the results show up, which would be unfortunate.
Well, I think the other thing you're identifying there is the level of self-efficacy, right? The level of how much do I feel ownership over these different things that I'm trying. And I would suggest that someone who feels a strong sense of ownership in their own, in this case, business, right? They have clarity that they're the one calling the shots, that they're making the decisions, that, they're going to make or break based on what they decide to do. They are going to be much less influenced by shiny objects than somebody who is, assigning that responsibility outside of themselves. So to your point, when they say, like, I don't know what happened, you tell me, often that's somebody who, to your point, like read the ad or, heard the thing and jumped on board because someone else was going to save them and didn't even really go through the thought process about whether that aligned with what it is that they believe and, where they are moving forward.
Yeah. And this is a whole other topic potentially, but, anytime you come to the conclusion that there's a particular function in your business that's important, and for a lot of people in the early days, months, sometimes years, although less commonly now, when you're reliant on your warm network for leads and deals and referrals and introductions and opportunities, you don't really prioritize marketing because seemingly you're well fed, right? Seemingly your network is providing you with enough volume and opportunity, and you're busy and you've got a couple of whale clients and whatever. So therefore, in your mind, marketing is not a priority. And then you lose a deal, or you lose a couple of deals, or your network doesn't seem to be driving as much opportunity anymore. And you're starting to realize, oh, I probably can't sufficiently rely on this very small, finite network of people that I already know, like, and trust me. I have to go outside of this network. Well, how do I do that? Well, there's this thing called marketing, right, that I have to now focus on. But, to your point, some people mail it in and they go, well, I'm just going to try a tactic. I'm not going to really try to understand this discipline. I'm just going to try it. I'm going to do some outreach. I'm going to I'm going to do a thing very tactical, but not actually understand the discipline. And to your point, I think the folks who succeed understand that, yeah, they have to try tactics, sure, but more than that, they have to start thinking like marketers. They have to understand marketing as it applies to their business. They have to layer on another identity. And we have another podcast on this that talks about this idea that, people say, well, I'm not a marketer. That's the problem. Because you need to be now in order to succeed in this context.
Yeah, and this goes back to being like settled in the big picture and then allowing yourself space to experiment with tactics, right? So being clear that that you need to be a marketer, at least with some part of your week, right? That's part of your job, and really internalizing that, not just saying, yeah, that's a thing I need to do. Second to that, and also critically important, is getting really clear on your positioning, right? Like, who do I know myself to be as a consultant? What do I know my really core opinions to be? And if you can get yourself really clear in those places, which is why we spend so much time working on positioning with clients, right? We don't jump immediately to, okay, here are 14 tactics that you can use. We really focus on getting that foundation in place, because then you're in a place where you can start to run, well-controlled experiments, right? You can try a thing for a period of time, and to your earlier point, decide if it works or doesn't work. And then if it doesn't, shift, adjust, move to the next thing. But that clarity of purpose, quite frankly, is the thing that's going to get you through and stop you from being distracted by all the shiny objects.
Yeah, and to your point, a certain level of experimentation within a well-defined strategy is perfectly okay and reasonable, and obviously with the disclaimer that you shouldn't try something superficially and then jump ship when it's too early, even at a tactical level, is unwise. But I think also it pays to understand kind of how you're wired a little bit. So coming back to the unfair criticism that you leveled against me in the beginning of this episode. So, and I know you have a perspective on this where we may disagree a little bit, but I think a lot of it comes down to understanding kind of your natural inclinations. So one thing I've done, and we've talked about this, is I took the Kolbe assessment, Kolbe, Kolbe, which measures your cognitive ability. That is the way that you make decisions and process information and ultimately take action. And so, details aside, I think it's interesting to do. One of the things that I found about myself is I am really high on the quick start domain, which means that I like to try new things. That's just inherently how I am, and it was validating that when I took the assessment, it told me, it kind of affirmed what I already kind of knew about myself, but maybe thought was a bit of a flaw, right? And it reframed it as a strength. Versus there are other domains like follow through. So a high follow through person doesn't really have the issue that we're talking about. Like they start something, they finish it, right? Carrie's absolutely one of those people, right? And so I think it pays to know what your natural disposition is here, because now you know what you're dealing with, right? So we know, and we make jokes about this on the team, like Ahmed's a quick start. So we come out of a meeting and we have an idea. By the time the meeting is over, Ahmed's already started like working on it, actioning it, etc. Now, I think we've built enough kind of boundaries around it that's okay, right? We have a strategy, we know big picture where we're going, we have a vision. I'm not going into some random new market just like on a whim. I'm experimenting within the scope of what we're trying to accomplish, and therefore, it's generally productive and we can fail fast and figure things out. Where it becomes a problem is if, all of a sudden now we're trying things at the expense of our strategy. We're trying things for the sake of trying things, whether or not they align with our strategic goals and vision and objectives. And that's where it becomes problematic, I think.